Hey everyone, Thyworm here with my take on farming Scarabs using tier 17 maps. Next to Scarabs we're getting a bunch of maps, but primarily Scarabs are what we are after. Let's dive in. I would like to preface this video by mentioning that tier 17 maps still suck ass. They do, ladies and gentlemen, and while ass sucking depending on your taste can be pleasant, I mean this in a very non-pleasant way. Tier 17s have numerous horrible modifiers, and rather than using 3 regex strings like I did last league, I went with a different approach. But make no mistake, they're still terrible and should be reworked once again. They are easier than last league, and overall with an average righteous fire chieftain build I managed to mostly clear them, but I wouldn't call it fun content. Let's talk about prerequisites. Of course, you need some tier 17 maps. They are random drops in tier 16 maps. It doesn't really matter which ones you're getting, they're all fine. They're all the same for this strategy. I ran 10 ziggurat maps for a small experiment, and I've ran many more without tracking the loot. All of the tier 17s work well because we're not killing the boss. Then you need a cast on death portal setup unless you have a god tier build. This is because you will die, as we are not going to spend 20 chaos orbs per tier 17 map rerolling this bullshit. No, we will run highly unfavorable modifiers, which means we will die, which means a portal combined with a cast on death is an excellent defensive layer. Finally, you need a regex string that makes sense for your build. I'm using PoE regex for this, the link is in the description. I would like to stress that I put only tier 17 modifiers on the regex that completely break my build, such as no regen, union of souls, dealing no damage 40% of the time because that shit is annoying as hell, marked for death, and that is pretty much it. That means there are still plenty of other modifiers that are incredibly dangerous, but I refuse to spend half my chaos orbs on rolling tier 17 maps. Let's talk about how this strategy works. You have your regex and you rolled your tier 17s, which should be a piece of cake if you stuck to my advice, because there should not be many blocking modifiers over there. What we're going to do is only clear the trash mobs in tier 17 maps, meaning all the monsters in the map, and we completely ignore the boss. You can try the boss if you want, I suppose, but I'm not going to bother. This means you don't get uber fragments, which is a drawback, and you could therefore conclude that we're wasting tier 17 maps. I won't argue with that, but doing this same strategy on tier 16 is way less effective, and as I have no real interest at the moment in uber bosses, I am fine sacrificing tier 17 maps. So again, we only kill the trash because they do drop tons of maps, scarabs and other loot, and that is what we're after. This strategy is excellent for farming maps, scarabs and gold, and because we're only killing the trash, it does allow us to take much more horrible modifiers. Those modifiers would be completely bricking if you would actually try to kill the boss, but for the trash they are kind of fine in most cases. That ultimately makes this strategy quite simple. We clear as much of the map as possible. Sometimes that won't be a lot if you run into a bunch of bad modifiers, but most of the time I was able to clear the entire map except the boss. And a bit later in this video I will show you the results and why I think it's worth running even if you completely brick some of these maps. So here's a small experiment that I ran. It's just to make a point here. It's not to, be extensive in terms of data. I know it's only 10 maps, but I ran 10 completely random tier 17s, all ziggurat maps, which were only rolled against the regex that you saw me make earlier. These maps are from time to time still a total shit show, but I managed to fully clear 90% of them in this case. The results are shown in this little stash tab. I am only documenting the maps, scarabs and gold. I have 177 scarabs, 24 8-mod corrupted jungle valleys, 28 8-mod corrupted toxic sewers, and 257,000 gold for only 10 maps. Let's talk about the Atlas passive tree and the choices that I made. We need to make ourselves strong to run tier 17 maps, so for player strength we have packed with energy, which is still decent. We also take all the shrine nodes, providing significant buffs, which partly can offset all those bad modifiers, and of course all scarab nodes available on the tree. We have Searing Exarch as the GOAT influence on SSF, and we have all the explicit map modifier nodes because we're already screwed anyway, and we have our cast on death portal setup. it is smooth sailing in that sense. So get that extra loot and use those portals. I want to quickly give a few pointers regarding target farming Scarabs. While true target farming isn't available with tier 17 maps, there are two factors that you're able to influence. The first factor is blocked league mechanics. If you block league mechanics in the Atlas tree, you also block the Scarabs attached to that league mechanic from dropping. And I'm not 100% sure how loot drops work exactly, of course, but I'm imagining that every time a Scarab drops, it rolls a number and based on the outcome, it picks a Scarab. By blocking league mechanics, you drastically reduce the pool of numbers, you drastically reduce the Scarab outcomes, but not the overall dropped Scarabs. You still drop the same number of Scarabs, meaning that out of all the Scarabs that drop, you are much more likely getting the ones that you want. The second factor is favoring Scarabs. In the Atlas passive tree, it's possible to favor certain Scarabs, doubling their drop chances. And if you combine blocking with favoring, you can sort of target farm the Scarabs you need, and I feel it works quite well. Let me talk about Scarabs for a bit that I'm using in the map device, not the Scarabs that I'm farming. To make our lives a bit more bearable, I am using Nico Scarabs for Packed with Energy. I'm using a Shrine Scarab for more player buffs, so that's a Domination Scarab. We're using Cartography Scarabs for more maps, including the one that gives 8 mod corrupted maps, and the 5th Scarab is a Shaper Influence one for no particular reason. You can basically slot in any Scarab you want here for this strategy. It wouldn't necessarily mean too much, but I wouldn't recommend League Mechanics Scarabs because we're not investing in the Atlas passive tree in League Mechanics. I would recommend, for example, the ones that add monsters, pack size, strong boxes, or anything like that. That will work perfectly fine. And I personally would avoid putting in very rare or precious Scarabs because there's a decent chance you brick the map completely losing those Scarabs. So I'm putting in Scarabs I don't mind throwing away for a map here or there because of bad modifiers. Let's talk pros and cons. Pros are up first. 1. At least you now have a use for tier 17s, which doesn't feel absolutely horrible. 2. You really do get tons of maps and Scarabs even when completing 50% of a tier 17 map. And 3. This strategy doesn't ask you to spend a fortune on Chaos Orbs and reroll all those maps, which is super tedious. But clearly there are cons as well. 1. Tier 17s are still complete bullshit with bullshit modifiers, and running them isn't particularly fun. 2. Not killing the bosses means you don't get uber boss shards or fragments. To me that is an acceptable trade-off, but you may have a different opinion. And 3. You still need a somewhat decent build to run even the trash mobs of tier 17s. You can't walk in there with no armor or uncapped resistance or bad defenses and expect to survive more than a few packs. If you ever wanted a reason to take out those tier 17s without massive investment, or you want a decent strategy to farm Scarabs, this is the one for you, at least so far in SSF, assuming you have a somewhat decent build. I hope you try out this strategy. For me it worked really well, so let me know what you think. Also let me know if you have any suggestions for this video or future content. Subscribe and like for more PoE SSF guides. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Love you all, see you soon, bye bye.